The family Chantel star Pedro Jimeno is one of the 90-Day Fiance's biggest villains for hurting Chantel Everett. But his infamy is also the result of his spinelessness. Pedro began his reality TV career with 90 DF Season 4. He came to America from the Dominican Republic after getting engaged to Chantel. The sweet couple went against their family's wishes to find their own happiness, but fate had other plans. Married life wasn't a happily ever after for Chantel and Pedro. Their loved ones started interfering in Chantel and Pedro's affairs, eventually leading to the downfall of their successful romance. No one could have predicted that the family Chantel would someday document Chantel and Pedro's divorce. Season 5 was all about Chantel and Pedro severing ties after more than 6 years of marriage. It had all come down to Pedro not wanting to stay married to Chantel anymore. He ran away from their relationship problems and chickened out of things by filing for divorce. He declared there was going to be no reconciliation in the future. There were accusations of infidelity and financial mismanagement, and it was Pedro who fans blamed, even though he yearned to look like the victim. Chantel had not told her parents or her family that she had gotten engaged to Pedro. Pedro was Chantel's fiance, and they'd been together for 1 year since Pedro had proposed to her. The problem was that Chantel had made up a lie that Pedro was coming to the U.S. on a student visa because her parents had never met Pedro. She did it because she believed her parents would accuse Pedro of coming to America for a visa, as the K-1 visa was his only option. They had a month left to marry, and Chantel was keeping Pedro a secret. However, Chantel's secret is what led to her family actually believing that Pedro was a scammer. It's what they kept believing until the couple's divorce, and even want to get him deported. Pedro didn't have the confidence to ask Chantel's parents for her hand in marriage. He let Chantel call the shots and later resented her for making him look like a fraud to her family when he could have taken charge and convinced the Everetts that he was the right man for their daughter. Chantel's decision was a recipe for a disaster that the couple couldn't avoid since they had to get married come whatever may. Chantel wasted so much time, which could have been used by her family, to get to know Pedro better. Chantel eventually pressured Pedro to talk to her family, and he started resenting her even before they got married. Chantel put Pedro in a spot. The couple told Chantel's family just 6 days before they were getting married. Chantel's family started accusing Pedro and his mother, Lydia Morel, of fraudulent behavior. It was something that could have done serious harm to Lydia's credibility since she was a lawyer. In the end, it was Lydia who kept nagging Pedro to divorce Chantel. He couldn't shake his mom's advice out of his head, and he was too weak to fight it. Pedro let his mom and his sister control him, and he did exactly what he was told, without giving his relationship another chance when things were easily fixable. Chantel was working hard to graduate from nursing school despite all the chaos in her personal life. Pedro had been working and wished to move forward with his own education once Chantel graduated. Pedro's plans were shattered when Chantel told him she had managed to pass all her exams, but was not graduating since she failed her final exam. Instead of consoling Chantel, who was not graduating with all of her friends and had to reapply for the next semester at the nursing school, Pedro was furious and made her feel bad for not passing. Pedro told Chantel he wasn't proud of her. Chantel's friends were supporting her and knew that she was hurting. Pedro told her openly that he was disappointed in her. Pedro didn't care about Chantel failing or passing her test. All that mattered to him was that his plans to start his own life were delayed. He couldn't muster the courage to say that to Chantel's face. Instead, he made her look incompetent. Pedro expected to come to a clean home after work with a hot meal prepared for him. He couldn't care less about how many days Chantel had to be on a nurse shift and how much rest she needed on her days off. He expected her to cook and clean because he worked more days than her. Meanwhile, Pedro spent his time on his off days with his coworkers and friends when he should have been spending time with Chantel. He could have hired house help if he wanted his house clean. Chantel didn't owe him anything, yet she started to change things about herself to keep him happy. Pedro did not acknowledge Chantel's efforts. He claimed Chantel wasn't supporting him, but at the same time, he was being vague about it. Pedro knew that if he openly spoke about wanting a wife who did the cooking and cleaning for him apart from having a job, he would come across as misogynistic. He was emotionally dismissive of Chantel. Pedro's attitude towards Chantel didn't change despite her trying to cook eggs for him. He'd made up his mind to leave. Chantel grew up in a family that respected relationships. Her mother, Karen, was the matriarch of the family, and her father didn't have an issue with it. Chantel never saw her parents arguing over petty issues like cooking and cleaning. Her mother was dominating in the marriage, and that's what Chantel too desired to be. She wanted Pedro to be a caring husband like her father. Pedro showed her that he could be the man she was always looking for with the way he behaved in the initial years. Perhaps her expectations of Pedro were too high. She wanted him to fit in a mold. However, Pedro saw this side of Chantel as too demanding. He wanted a way out, not to bend over backward for a woman he was losing interest in. He was never going to be a hype man for Chantel, and she should have known it. Rather than using Chantel for citizenship, Pedro was probably looking for Chantel to get tired of him and leave him, but then it was too late, and he had to pull the plug himself. Jimeno. Pedro denied all accusations of cheating on Chantel. Chantel accused Pedro of cheating on her with a coworker during their marriage. Chantel's mother, Karen, even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Chantel labeled Pedro's infidelity as disrespectful. He insisted that he was innocent and that he'd never hooked up with anyone since meeting Chantel. Cheating is a selfish act. Cheating on one's partner is the ultimate act of cowardice. It can be avoided by telling their significant other that they need a change or no longer love them, but cheaters are afraid to speak up. Even if Pedro admitted to cheating, it would drag his reputation down. It would mean that he was scared of Chantel. He was making a mistake, and it wasn't by accident that he was committing infidelity behind her back. Cheating comes from a place of insecurity, from a person who lacks communication skills and self-control. Pedro could have eventually blamed Chantel for what he did, saying that if she paid more attention to him, he wouldn't have sought affection elsewhere. Once Pedro got his new real estate job, he started to think of himself as a catch. He felt like his job was extraordinary and so prestigious that Chantel's job would never compare. He openly declared that Chantel didn't have no goals in her life. It just proved what Chantel had been complaining about all along. He did not appreciate what she did. Pedro was a hypocrite who didn't have a real career before getting into real estate. Once he got the taste of success, Pedro started chasing his American dream with his best efforts. Pedro saw Chantel as being complacent. She was comfortable with herself being a successful nurse, but her goals didn't align with Pedro's. He likely thought Chantel was someone who could never compare with him, since he was rising above everyone. Cesar Garcia. Pedro started thinking of himself differently once he got into real estate. He started dressing better and talking well. His ego was inflated, and he was meeting new people who were influencing him. Pedro didn't want to spend time at the house with Chantel. He wanted to be out there. He turned into a different person when he started earning. He didn't mind that he was being ungrateful. He was now finally ready to leave. Pedro thought Chantel had brought nothing to the table, and he was doing all the slogging. He'd already made a name for himself with reality TV and didn't need Chantel anymore. Pedro no longer wanted to be associated with a show that ran on his wife's name and popularity. His weight loss after his divorce, his new fit physique, and his flexing his expensive purchases on social media are all tactics used by the family Chantel star to prove to himself that he made the right choice by leaving Chantel. It's the truth that Pedro regrets all of his decisions, but then again, he's too spineless to admit it.